Welcome back, dear internet. You didn't ask for it, but I'm giving it to you anyway. It's another episode of the podcast. Got a lot to talk about, so let's jump right in. So first things first is a training update. I actually started my training regimen a couple weeks ago, so getting tuned up there. However, went and shot a local club match and it was a dumpster fire. However, I made the most entertaining match video through stitching together 3 cameras. On my YouTube channel, all of my match videos from here forward are going to be as entertaining as I can make them so that normies who see that will think it looks cool and maybe consider coming and joining the sport. And part of the reason the match was a dumpster fire was because when you get a used competition gun, it's always good to check into all of the springs and just go ahead and replace them proactively, and then you can kind of manage the spring life as you need to. So I'd shot about 6,000 rounds or so through the Ultimate Racer. And just this week, right before the match, I noticed that I was having issues with mags dropping free with superficial contact with the mag button, which didn't really connect anything with me, but the night before the match I was cleaning my gun and the mag catch would stick on the outside of the frame. I was able to overpress it and it would kind of get stuck there, which means that the spring on the mag catch was going. So I took the button off the magazine paddle, and with the shorter button I was unable to over depress the mag catch, so all was well. Until we got to the match and I quickly realized that the hammer spring was also on its last legs and had a bunch of light strikes. And so there were 6 light strikes that cost me about 15 seconds in the match. Thankfully, it's only a club match, so it was a learning lesson. But if that's you and you just stole a deal on a competition gun, go ahead and figure out what the springs are that need to be changed so the gun can be reliable, and go ahead and take care of that now, and don't let the match be the one to show you that you've got issues. As far as other gun updates that are more exciting about the Bull Armory Ultimate Racer, if you head over to my Instagram, you can check out the photos there. So I made a couple of updates to the gun. I put some TTI base pads on the Bull magazines, which allow for 1 more round in my big sticks, so I can actually do 30+1 reliably out of my big stick magazines, which puts me on par with all the other open guns, which is fantastic. Bull has a new optic mount, which is actually pretty forward thinking. It's an RTS2 mount, which matches up with the Nico Sterling that they had been providing with their pistols, but the gas pedal that came on the gun had a very aggressive kind of really rolled over support hand type of grip to it. The new one has 2 screw patterns where you can have a more natural American type grip like we like to use thumb rest, but it also has the more exaggerated, like finger over the guard, really aggressive locked out wrist position as well. So that's pretty cool. And the riser itself is elongated so that if you use something like a Romeo Max 3, Romeo XL, any of the SIG sights, or the very excellent FTP Optics Alpha 3, which is what I actually mounted on the gun. I wanted to try out an 8 MOA. If you've been following the channel for a while, way back in the day, I tried the 6 MOA dot and had pretty good success with it. And on an open gun, the 8 MOA dot is absolutely fantastic. So check out that post over on Instagram. There may or may not be a discount code on the Alpha 3, but I can say as great as 6 MOA is, 8 is even a little bit better. I don't think I would want to go any larger than an 8. That really does kind of cap out at about 50 yards or so. The 8 MOA, if you're familiar with like the Hollow Sun 407 CO, the 8 MOA from the FTP is much smaller than the way that Hollow Sun looks, at least to my eyes. The dot appears like super crisp even when I don't have my corrective lenses or glasses in, and I have an astigmatism, because you're able to dial down the brightness to a level that is manageable and doesn't cause starbursting. So that's been a really nice feature, and the width of the optic, it just lines up perfectly with the size of the scope. So if you're an open shooter and you're looking for a dot, I think that's a good one you should check out. And another update, because I blew up the Ultimate Racer, not once but twice, is I have picked up the Shell Shock Technologies. They're actually a sponsor of my shooting now, and I'm very happy to report that the NAS3 cases are absolutely fantastic. There's something to be said for loading the same cases that are all the same length, because the consistency you can get with your load is significantly better. And the NAS3 cases, if you're not familiar with them, it actually is a 2-piece case. The actual little combustion cup and stem, that contain all of the explosion are a steel alloy, so they can withstand higher pressures than a brass could, and the base is actually aluminum, so it doesn't increase the wear on any of your extractor, ejector, or anything like that. And a result of this is that the case is about 50% lighter than a brass case. It has a natural lubricity, so it is able to be extracted from the chamber and thrown farther with the energy of the slide. There's really a lot going on if you're a 9 major shooter, and you've seen what used brass prices are right now, especially processed once fired brass. The NAS3 cases are not very much more than that, and you can reload them possibly indefinitely. I'll be doing a video on the NAS3 cases here shortly, but I need to get a couple more loads. I think the most I've loaded a single piece so far is 3 times, but they've all withstood it just fine, and they're all measuring out at about 0.75 inches, which is what you want for a 9mm case. Talking about a mini review for you guys, the Range Panda Eric Steiner has sent me a replacement SRO cover for my SOR red dot. I lost my SRO cover at Nationals last year, so somebody down in Frostproof at the match is enjoying my nice red SRO cover, but now I have this nice black one. And having an optic cover is a really good idea at a range, especially if you shoot it like a dusty range, because when the gun is in the holster, the back lens of the optic can collect dust, but the Range Panda optic cover goes right on your SRO and keeps all that dust off. And he actually came up with another interesting thing. It's like the optic cover, however, it is the dry fire cover. So I did a video a while back about how to do target focus shooting, how to practice that using the occluded sight on your red dot, just putting a piece of tape over the front. Well, he modified his optic cover design and came up with this little gem, and it is a black shroud that just hooks on right over the optic and allows you to practice your target focus shooting in dry fire, or if you have an SRO and you're in frostproof Florida shooting into the sun into the morning, then you can actually just use this also to stop the ghost dot from appearing on your dot. Those of you who are new and haven't seen the video, the premise is pretty simple. If you occlude the lens of your optic, you will find out really fast whether you're dot focusing or target focusing, the correct way to use a red dot, and why I absolutely sneer at anybody who says they just bloom a smaller dot. That's code for I'm using a dot focus and I'm having a hard time with accuracy. Using an optic cover like this, you put this on here and then you present to target, and if you can't see the target at all, it means that you are dot focusing. If you have to force your other eye to look past the optic at the target, and then you'll be able to superimpose the dot over the target, basically the same as if the lens had nothing on it at all. It's a really cool feature, and especially if you're a new dot shooter, this is a way you need to be practicing. So rangepanda.com is where you can get these, or you can just throw a piece of tape over the front of your lens, but you're gonna need an optic cover for that SRO because they don't come with one, which is a shame considering that the SRO is like the most expensive optic, specifically made for gaming, but they don't take into consideration things gamers need like an optic cover, but Eric's got you covered. So before we hop into the interview, and this month's interview is going to be Tim Herron, I've got 2 USPSA questions to ponder, and this first one is a topic that I was really surprised to see such resistance from folks. If you follow the channel, you'll be aware that I made a race holster versus traditional closed holster video, and to kind of bottom line it for you, there's absolutely no difference at my level between the race holster and the closed holster. However, USPSA breaking ranks with IPSC does not allow the use of race holster in production carry optics or single stack. And I mentioned my findings in the video in a Facebook group, and the level of discourse that was enjoyed was just, it was comical. Basically, the people who are against it are really against it, and they have no good reason why, other than possibly the most valid reason being that Mike Foley has really screwed up the rules so far, so why would we update the rules again? Because it's just asking for them to screw it up even further. And to that, yeah, I see your point. That's very valid concern, but at the same time, if you boil it down, so if the holster itself doesn't affect any of the stuff going on from the first beep until the last shot fired, the only thing it changes about the division would be the time when you're not shooting, when you're walking around the range and pasting. You don't want to jog your gun out of a too loose Kydex holster. There's absolutely no question that a race holster takes more fiddling. It has a bad optic to new shooters who think that's just one more piece of gear. They're super expensive, and I don't want to have to buy that. But at the same time, like, as you get used to using a locking race holster, when you go back to a Kydex holster, even good Kydex holsters, I mean, they're just gun buckets. They're passively retained, and I don't like them. But To which some of you have already started commenting, well, GX Holsters makes that little ratcheting mechanism, and you're absolutely right, they do, but at that point, it's kind of like a second-rate race holster, and if that's what we're doing and they cost about the same as a race holster and the race holsters don't affect anything once the beep goes off, you can't really say that the type of gear being used, considering my closed holster and my race holster are in the exact same position, at the exact same height. There's not a compelling reason. It's not lending character to a division other than a meaningless sort of optic. It's like demanding that all the grips in production be red or something stupid like that. It doesn't affect how the game is played, but if all the grips are red and you talk about changing the grips to blue, like somehow that affects the character of the division. So I invite you, dear internet, to jump into the comments, and I would love to hear an articulate defense about keeping the closed holster requirement and not going to a race holster standard in carry optics production and single stack like IPSC, which is the parent organization of USPSA, does. So my next rant to go on, and then I promise I'll get off my soapbox and give you guys the value you actually showed up for, and that would be the Tim Herron interview, is talking about stage design. So I am a co-match director. I have been a co-match director on a level 2 match and really spent a lot of time and energy trying to curate what a good match is. So in speaking to some of my match director cohorts, one of them is catching some flack for the stages that he posted for a higher level match that he's got coming up because he has lower round counts. Now, this is being filmed in the mid-year of 2021, where a box of 9mm, if you're lucky and can find one, at best is about $17 to as much as like $25 for just range fodder. At the same time, I just bought primers today at $75 per 1,000 plus hazmat with a limit of 2. So the primer cost has basically tripled from what it was just a year ago. So that's the environment that we're planning matches in right now in USPSA. And if you just put that aside and ignore the cost of ammunition as well as the pain and heartache of reloading your ammunition, all that kind of stuff, more doesn't always mean better, guys. Round count does not reflect quality. Putting more rounds in a stage just means there's more rounds in the stage. Like the ranges that we typically have in the US, and I've really competed sort of all over the South and Southeast United States, the ranges generally aren't big enough to do 32 round field courses correctly. And when I say they're not big enough, if you have one target stand with 2 scoring targets on it, you're doing it wrong. There's almost no interest that having 2 targets on the same stand would be. A typical bay and most of the gun clubs kind of flanking most of the metro cities throughout the South and Southeast, most pistol bays are maybe 20 yards wide by 25 yards deep. And frankly, that's not long enough or wide enough to do something really interesting where you can squeeze all 32 rounds in and have varied presentations at each position. You can just phone it in and set up barricades with breaks in them, providing you nice arrays of 4 targets at the exact same distance with the exact same difficulty, but that's really lazy stage design. That's not a quality stage. So for those of you who are helping out your local clubs designing stages, I figured I would throw out some of my rules of thumb on designing interesting stages and contribute to the conversation and just give you some points to ponder and think about as you're drawing stages for your clubs. So we'll start off with a list of don'ts and finish up with some do's. So first and foremost, absolutely do not make parallel stages. Unless it's like a speed shoot and there's an interesting like activator, like you can use parallel stages, but if you have like a medium or long course field course, making a parallel stage is just, I mean, it's boring. These kinds of stages, usually there's one plan and you can just mirror it, and it's just dumb. It's not fun. It's kind of lazy. It's aesthetically pleasing when you look at it from above in SketchUp, but on the ground, like I can't think of a parallel stage except for one of the short courses at Nationals last year that had 2 max traps associated with mini poppers that was a parallel presentation, but because you can't shoot the poppers at the same time, it created an interesting timing thing. So that's a good example of parallelism, and pretty much all the other ones you've seen are bad. The next don't is don't set up a stage where there are obvious shooting positions. And what I mean is if there are however many targets there are on the bay, it's probably 15 or 16 because that's just how we roll in the US. If there are 15 or 16 targets and they're basically even divided between like 4 ports or gaps in walls, and there's really only one position where you can see the targets in that, so it creates 5 discretely defined shooting positions. That's just flat boring. There's basically one way to shoot those stages. It doesn't allow the shooters to use their kind of cleverness and understanding of their efficiency to chart out kind of the most efficient route through the stage for them. It doesn't create meaningful conversations as the shooters try and solve it. It's just frankly boring, and it's a straight up execution stage. If that's the kind of stage you like, then maybe check out IDPA, because that's exactly the way IDPA stages have to be drawn based on the rules that they have. USPSA is intended to be freeform, and I think most shooters agree that the freeform type stages are much more interesting. I've already mentioned it, but it bears repeating. Don't put 2 scoring targets on the same stand. There's absolutely no reason to do it. You're just inflating the round count. Nobody thinks it's interesting, and when you put it in a position, it changes what could be kind of a dynamic position that somebody can try and roll through and shoot on the move, to basically slowing down to a crawl, if not a stop, to be able to get off 4 shots on a stand that really just requires 2. Don't make target engagements so difficult that most shooters won't be able to shoot them successfully, or it just completely sucks the fun out of the stage. This is really common amongst new stage designers who want to like brag about how technical their stage designs are and how it really tests skill and all this kind of stuff. Like, this is a game where points are divided by time. So the virtue of having the timer right behind your head encouraging you to get done faster automatically makes the stage more difficult than if you just shot it in a vacuum with no time. So don't put 25-yard head boxes out there and think you're clever or really good at designing stages, because it's honestly not. Like, the high-end shooters, the guys shooting with dots, they're going to be able to hit those head boxes better than everybody else. You're just punishing middle of the pack and lower pack shooters who don't necessarily have the command of the fundamentals to be able to shoot that penalty free. So some good rule of thumb on how to use partial targets is to use hard cover from about 15 yards and out. You can use it closer than that if you want to, but hard cover at those distances is interesting because you can't see the holes in the target and the holes in black don't show up. When a no-shoot goes there, it's going to increase the level of risk for that engagement so much that the shooters come to a stop. It takes all of the risk-reward calculation basically off the table, because if you throw a shot, you're losing 10 points. So everybody is going to turtle up and shoot those targets like they need to, and that's not particularly interesting. Where they do get interesting is using no-shoots on speed traps, about 15 yards and in. If you tease people with a no-shoot, it provides kind of a visual distraction where, oh gosh, there's a no-shoot on, like even if you put it on like the CD line on the side of the target, but you put it at like 12 yards, that's going to trip people up and make them over-aim and go slow and really slow down, and that's a very interesting shooting challenge. And if you really want to screw with PC shooters or open shooters, put headbox shots featuring no-shoots at like 3 and 4 yards, because height over bore is an issue, and shooters who don't understand how to adjust for height over bore are going to drop shots into the no-shoot at those distances. So that's probably the most interesting use. Another reason I don't like about no-shoots is for people who can't call shots. They can see that hole in that white piece of paper and send extra shots. So it doesn't really promote the skill of calling shots. So we use plenty of hard cover, use the no-shoot sparingly, and you honestly don't have to use as much of the hard cover or the no-shoots on the partial than you think, just because of the time thing that we talked about. Don't create stages that make it impossible to get down to range. And I'll go on the heels of this. Also, don't use, especially at club matches, don't put stages out there that have 2 activators. If you've got a 12-man squad and you've got 2 activators on a stage and you're in the middle of the squad, you've got 2 shooters who aren't resetting because they're getting ready to shoot. You've got 1 shooter walking with the ROs to score. You've got 2 ROs who are holding the clock and holding the tablet. And you've got 2 shooters probably who are out of circulation, loading, cleaning mags, getting ready to get back into the mix. When you have 2 activators on the same stage, that basically sucks up 2 people who would otherwise be resetting. So if you lose people to conversation or anything like that, it slows down match flow, and basically, you know that squad that you always run up on and you get to watch half their squad shoot, and it's always on like 1 stage per month. It's usually the stage with the activators. So don't put 2 activators on a club match stage. More doesn't mean better all the time. Give us interesting activator sequences, and more activators doesn't necessarily make it better. And keeping on the theme of reset, don't use barricades that prevent people from going up and down range freely. You can put breaks in the walls so that people can get down range to paste and reset targets. If you make it so that only people have to go all the way around the edges of the stage to get back there and score, it takes forever for them to get off the bays. So just provide the breaks in the walls so that people can get back from resetting and we can all get home sooner. Do consider how the RO is going to follow the shooter. There's plenty of stage designs that I've kicked back in our club match because I'm not real sure how the RO is supposed to follow the shooter. Specifically, a classic thing is like a really narrow hallway that's tight with doors where you have to like go down one side and come back up the other. Sometimes as an RO, there's newer shooters and you want to keep a close eye on them and keep them from doing something potentially dangerous. And on like a hallway type stage where there's like a wall and a wall in the middle and you have to go down and come back up the opposite hallway, that's really tough for ROs to do without getting in the shooter's way, causing interference, or not being close enough to stop a shooter who's going to be potentially dangerous. So do consider how an RO is going to move around the stage and give him all the help you can, honestly. Do use about 18 to 20 round stages and about 26 to 28 stages if you're using steel. Those numbers are magic round counts for a reason. The 18 to 20 round stages will have your production, carry optics, and limited shooters consider skipping a reload potentially, creating a real risk versus reward sort of thing. And the 26 to 28 round stages will challenge your open shooters and make them consider potentially skipping a reload. That's very interesting. It creates a risk versus reward thing, and there is potential time on the table if you don't load. But if you send too many makeup shots through shooting too fast or whatever it is, then you can create sort of standing reload opportunities. That's a really sweet spot for stage design. Like honestly, there's nothing interesting about a 32 round stage that a 26 to 28 round stage doesn't emulate as well. Like having 6 more targets than a 26 round stage, it usually proves nothing. It just makes more noise and it makes resetting take longer. Do provide targets that are available from multiple positions and can potentially be re-engaged. One of my favorite things to do as a stage designer is introduce a target that shows up in 2 arrays that are forced by one target or another and present far enough away where you can't see the holes in it to force people to re-engage it, because that is a unscored error. There would be 2 extra shots, so you're basically going to end up penalizing the shooter however long it takes them to transition onto the target and split it again when they re-engage a target, and potentially screwing up their reloads. It's a really cool tool that if you can figure out how to work into stage design, creates very interesting stages. Having targets that are available from multiple view angles, it gives the low cap guys more options. It gives high cap guys the potential to stitch together and blend positions between one to the other and keep the gun up and shooting. So it's going to put a premium on being able to shoot on the move. That's generally a good idea. And do consider the targets that show up in a mandatory array. Do not put them all at the same focus depth. And what I mean is, like, don't put targets that are all between 7 and 10 yards and maybe one of them has a little bit of hard cover. Like, they're all the same amount of focus. It takes the same trigger discipline. It's not a very interesting array. Like, vary it, see how you can introduce, like, you know, a much smaller target, like use a mini popper at like 14 yards, partialed up target at like 5 yards, and maybe like a hardcover partial at like 10 yards, so that there is a real sort of, well, I need to adjust my speed and I need to adjust my focus on all these different arrays to kind of navigate. If you put all the targets at the same distance, the same height, it's not an interesting presentation. The stage, if you go back to low cap nationals and look at that one classifier with like 4 targets, 4 targets, and 4 targets that everybody was posting their match video on Instagram, that's not a very interesting stage. Like, it just isn't. It's a dumb classifier, and I can't believe that that was what they came up with to test a moving classifier. It's like the epitome of bad stage design in USPSA, and they're putting it in there as a classifier. So don't do stuff like that. It's just not interesting. It's not fun. It's just, it feels like it's rote and you have to just go and do it. And finally, do consider new guys when you're making the stages. Not saying just give it layups so that everybody can feel like they're having a good time. But if the furthest target is 25 yards and it's an open target, they may be able to hang one on there, and if they're lucky, shooting whatever gun they have in limited. If you have the longest engagement at like 25 yards, that's where your bays max out or whatever, don't put steel at like 25 yards, especially not plates. We did a plate rack at 20 yards one time, and that's just too much. I mean, I watched new shooters go through every mag on their belt going to war with that plate rack. I tell new shooters in our shooter meeting that send 3 at each steel, and if you can't do it in 3, then it wasn't meant to be. So consider that when you're setting up the arrays and making these things that difficult. The new guys need to be able to walk away and be a little bit humbled, but at the same time really enjoy it. But at the same time, because it's not all just cutting in one way, the stages need to be interesting enough where the best guys in the club are going to walk away and be like, man, that was awesome. I really had to figure this one thing out, or I really, chanced it on this one thing. Like, give them something to latch onto as well. So if you consider the very best guys in the club and the very newest guys in the club and make stages that both of them can feel good about, then you have been a successful stage designer. So sound off in the comments. Let me know what your thoughts on what makes interesting stages for you. I think this is worthwhile conversation. I think we really need to elevate our game in stage design. So moving on, and we're going to talk to Tim Herron. So for those of you who were new to the sport and potentially don't know, Tim Herron has been around for quite a while. He was one of the first guys on the podcast scene. He's now a full-time instructor. He shoots for Team Nighthawk. He's a 3-division Grandmaster. He's a super nice guy, and he helped throw the ring into the fires of Mount Doom. And I really enjoyed my conversation with Tim. He really gets into some of the awareness aspects of how you need to be directing your training. We talk about how to properly use iron sights. So if you're an iron sight shooter, he really does kind of lay out some gold on this. And I've condensed it down for the sake of the YouTube format. If you want to hear the full unedited interview, there is a link in the description to my Patreon where the whole thing is there. You can hear my 10-year-old son come in and ham it up. I'm presenting like 85% of it to you guys, but it's over an hour long if you want to hear the whole thing.
I'm Tim Herron and I own the company Tim Herron Shooting LLC. I'm a USPSA 3-division Grandmaster. I've been shooting pistols since 2010. I began teaching kind of part-time and coaching part-time as of 2014, 2015, and have now made this my full-time career as of 2018. And this is what I do for a living. So I get to travel around the country and teach classes full of like-minded people that want to get better at shooting. And I work with law enforcement. I work with some military groups and all kinds of stuff. So I have a good time with it.
More than ever now, we live in an environment where, everybody's got all the demands on their time, obviously. Getting to the range itself, just showing up, takes a lot of effort and a lot of coordination for most people, since ranges are always in the middle of nowhere and we don't live in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
Ammo is not available and expensive, and primers are hard to find. So it seems like a lot of the teaching, a lot of the kind of the grinded out sort of mentality, can't really do it as well in the current scenario that we're facing now. So how do we kind of shortcut that? So, using kind of the Jed Linsky method, what do people need to start doing and stop doing to get the most out of their time investment and their monetary investment?
I'd say the big thing is, and I see this a lot in students that come to classes too. Everybody finds a point where they get plateaued, right? And that always is kind of the concern I get from students is like, man, I've been shooting for X amount of time, and I'm tired of going to the range and feeling like I'm just not getting any better. And my first question to them is like, do you have a regimented practice session that you follow? And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, okay, that means the answer is no, you don't. Like, you generally go to the range and you kind of just do, kind of wherever the mood kind of takes you. And unfortunately, that caused a lot of excessive rounds to be shot with no focus or no purpose to those rounds. So, a lot of guys will, of course you can get on just about anybody's like Instagram channel or YouTube channel and see 150 drills. In like 2 clicks of a mouse click, you can find 50 different drills to go shoot, but it's knowing like the hows and whys of what that drill was developed to help build or work on. And I think a lot of people, they go through the motions. They just don't understand or really have a purpose to what it is they're trying to do in their own practice. So they fill an ammo can full of 400, 500, 600 rounds of ammo, and they feel like, well, as long as I'm going through the motions and I come back with an empty can, right, then I'm getting better somehow. And that's just not the case. Like, it's not just doing enough of it at home. Like, everybody likes to think, oh yeah, I get the gun out for 10 minutes a day, 5 days a week. And that's honestly not that common. But the thing, like, to go to the range and intermix dry fire in with your live fire practice, So instead of just like I guess the old training adage was everything that you dry fired. Then when you went to the range once a week to go live fire, you were basically live firing, the same types of drills to validate like what you were doing in dry fire. And I think it should be not just to validate, I think it should be a continuation of what you do in dry fire, but giving you an opportunity to dry fire multiple reps, like at speed on a range, right? Like with the most realistic atmosphere. And then instead of like shooting a 12 to 15 round like exercise, why not dry fire it 2 or 3 times first and then like validate it with 15 rounds, right? Or instead of shooting the entire drill, maybe shoot like if you're working on a movement drill, shoot the first position where you're just using the gun basically to stop the clock in the movement aspect of it, and have a more like in-depth and focused practice session to work on just the aspect of shooting that you're trying to improve on.
That's interesting because, I mean, the era which I came up in the whole dry fire thing was like when the dry fire bin book came out or whatever, was brand new, and that was kind of when I got into it. And just like everybody, I spent so much time in like a garage. It's usually like a one bedroom, like a small bedroom, or a garage is where people dry fire, right? And the problem with that is you never get big, long, aggressive movements. So you can always tell the guys who like that's their only form of practice, because that was me for a long time. Because they don't get out of second gear, like they stay in first or second gear throughout the whole stage. And to what you're saying, that's a great
exactly
point,
right,
because you can stretch it out on an actual outdoor range and do some hard running and some aggressive movement and get more out of it. So that's what I wish I had for myself in my dry fire space.
Like that purposeful practice session, if you're just shooting for the sake of shooting, right? And if you're not staying focused in what it is you're trying to accomplish, a lot of times what happens is you get guys that'll set up maybe they've got a practice group. So you've got 2 or 3 guys that'll get together on a range and they'll practice together. So they want to set up a stage, maybe a big stage, and they shoot that stage over and over and over again. And I'll tell you right now, like I was very guilty of that for a long, long time, and it's kind of stuck in this perpetual rut, where it was like, I can't seem to get any better, no matter how many rounds a week that I'm shooting, or no matter who I'm practicing with. And honestly, a lot of it was because like you get to a point where maybe you're purposeful for like the first 2 or 3 reps of something. And then it becomes like, like almost playing horse with your buddies, like on a basketball court, right? Then it's just like, okay, I'm going to do this. And then you've got to follow that. Okay. Now we're going to do this and I have to follow that. And it just becomes a competition, not a practice session, not something that's regimented. People lose focus really quick, like going to the range and saying like, okay, I've got an entire notebook full of things I want to work on, but they work on too much and it's too broad of a kind of an exercise routine, and they can't stay focused. Like they don't get focused reps on just 1 or 2 things. So, instead of going to the range and be like, okay, well, I'm here for 2 or 3 hours, I'm going to work on some speed stuff, right? So I'm going to do some like draw, shoot 2, reload 2, like 4 aces type stuff. And I'm going to shoot some L press stuff. And then I'm going to do some stand and shoot stuff. And okay, well, now I'm going to work on some accuracy stuff. So I'll shoot some groups. And okay, now I'll start working on some movement. And then, well, I'll start working on some other stage planning and things like that. And it becomes too broad. And the problem is so like my proposal and what I found to be extremely beneficial to me is to limit my round count now to like 200 to 300 rounds. Like 300 rounds is like, that's a pretty serious practice session for me. And in 300 rounds, like I focus on one aspect of my shooting.
Kind of another thing, just based on, because I interact with a lot of people in comment sections, and like we've been talking about it, it seems like a lot of the discussion in competing is about the hard skills themselves, but actually competing, there's a lot of skills that aren't gun handling or, just hard skill related. So what would you say is the number one hard skill, or not hard skill, that people are neglecting in their training that would probably pay dividends for them in matches?
I think a lot of people always talk about movement, right? That seems to be like the buzzword of the year, of the last couple of years, is like movement. Everybody wants to work on movement. Everybody wants to get good at moving and shooting. And, I hear a lot of people, kind of give reference to like, oh, USPSA is an athletic sport with a little bit of shooting involved. And the funny thing is like the winningest shooter to walk the planet, Rob Latham just won his 17th single stack national title at the age of 60 years old. Right. And like, so I don't necessarily think that athleticism is what is allowing Rob to still be at the top of the sport, or guys like Rob to be at the top of the sport. Obviously the guy back in the 80s and 90s, could shoot and move really, really well. But I think he's had to kind of learn how to keep himself relevant and basically kind of rebuild himself, as a shooter, and figure out like how, since he can't move as well, as age has kind of caught up with him a little bit. And of course he's got bad knees and things like that. But kind of how to stay at the top of the heap. And it's the fact that like efficiency is the big thing. And it's not really necessarily movement as much as efficiency. That is like the lowest hanging fruit in all of USPSA or all of the practical shooting sports, period. IDPA, IPSC, it doesn't seem to matter. Like efficiency, like, and how to blend tasks together for ultimate efficiency. Right. So, I mean, you could be the most athletic guy on the face of the planet, but if you don't have your gun up early, ready to start shooting targets before you even get to a position, you're behind the curveball. Right. Like, I think that's what kind of separates the top of the heap from the also rans, are the guys that are at the absolute pinnacle of the sport have learned to be able to blend multiple tasks together and become a much more efficient means of like task management, how to do things, all together at once.
It sounds like stage planning kind of comes into what you're talking about with efficiency, because you have to understand what an efficient thing to be doing is, like when the gun needs to be coming up and when you need to be shifting your weight out of position, or like I'm going to be moving offline and I'm going to be loading the gun as I move to the first position versus I'm going to draw statically. And so it sounds like it's part of what you're saying is stage planning, but not so much in the, like, I'm going to come up with a super secret squirrel strategy to game the stage.
It's stage planning. I guess I would almost say, instead of like thinking about it like stage planning, that's where like you get a lot of people, of course, that always, like, I'll see them at matches and they're like, hey, when are you going to have an advanced class, right? Like, when are you going to teach things like stage planning? And it's like, well, how advanced do you think stage planning is? And no, that's not it. It's stage visualization and stage choreography, right? Like how you choreograph, how you're going to get into a position with the gun up ready to shoot, how you're going to exit or flow through that position and roll out of that position, into the next position and blend those things together. That's the secret sauce. And it's like, once you get those things down, which honestly are fairly foundational, they kind of go hand in hand with things like gripping the gun and managing the sights and the normal standard things that we talk about when we talk about fundamental shooting. But those are also kind of fundamentals of how to shoot the practical shooting sports too, right? Is how to blend positions together, how to roll into a position with the gun up ready to shoot, or even shooting, right? And shooting sooner rather than faster. And
because I mean, what you just kind of also, like, you didn't actually say, but is implied is that, like, confidence, aggression, really execution. And what I found with my own stuff is you have to really go out there and try and own it, willing to fall flat on your face, kind of not zero or hero, but you can't shoot like you're afraid that you're going to get beat. Like, you've got to try and win. So how do you practice that? Like, how do you build up that kind of confidence to go and just kind of let it all hang out and let the chips fall where they may?
I think the big thing is, like, in your practice, and this is kind of something that I got, from Ben Steger years ago too, was, a lot of guys are always looking for ways on how to reduce pressure, like mental pressure. Like they get to the match on match day, and, they do things like mental management exercises and breathing exercises. And how do I reduce the pressure? And it's like, well, you're not going to reduce the pressure. I mean, when you're shooting for a match, you're shooting, kind of for all the marbles, whether it be a local match or a major match. Like, the pressure is induced by you because you want to do as best you possibly can. So instead of trying to learn, like, in practice, we don't practice with enough pressure on ourselves, and that's the the brunt of it. I mean, everybody goes to the range and we have a good time. If we have a range partner, somebody that we practice with, we might push each other a little bit, but there's really no pressure. A bit of that. And that's, like I said, that was one of the things that Ben kind of taught me years ago, was that instead of trying to do everything you can to reduce pressure in matches, you need to do everything you can to try to increase pressure, like that mental anxiety or that mental pressure in your practice, so that you can learn to work within that. But at the same time, kind of think certain people put too much pressure on themselves, even at a local match or a major match, to the point where they lock up and they can't execute under like this insurmountable blanket of pressure. And I don't think that's needed either, So, I mean, like for me, like my big push this year is a lot of partial targets at like 15 to 18 yards, and shooting on the move at like 20 to 25 yard targets. I'm not working much like 3 yard to 7 yard, like go fast, good for the grams types of stuff. I mean, in fact, my Instagram feed here over the last month or 2 months is pretty boring when it comes to like all that stand and shoot nonsense that unfortunately it's not making, like I've learned, it's just not making me a better shooter. The stuff that's making me a better shooter is the stuff that's just really, really hard that everybody is like, yeah, that doesn't even look fun. I don't want to practice that at all. Right. And holding yourself accountable for what you're doing. So instead of just, oh, darn, I had a miss, I'll go back and do it again. It's like, well, first of all, you need to stop and think about, like, you need to be focused on, what did I learn from that miss in practice? Right. What did I learn from that delta or that down 3 versus you learning from every single repetition that you do when you shoot alphas, right? Most of the time, you're not learning anything from just repeated success. It's like, there's nothing really to be gained there, other than a bit of confidence, right? But the learning actually occurs when you're observing failures, like when you're seeing where the wheels are falling off, or you're seeing like, okay, I'm pushing myself to a point where this stuff is no longer easy and I really have to stay focused. That's where you need to be, like in your practice all the time.
That's kind of an interesting thought, just thinking about this through the lens of everybody who could potentially listening, because like you and I talking, we're fairly high level shooters, you especially. Shooting targets on the move at 20 and 25 yards is legitimately difficult. With an iron sighted gun, it's really, really difficult. Like with an open gun, not quite as hard, but still not easy. How do you talk to kind of that like C-class guy who his fundamentals aren't the best, he's still throwing mics and their mysteries? Like, how does he tune up his difficulty in his practice so he's not completely demoralized and it's just completely unrealistic for him to make it happen? And versus like he's got it, he's coming close enough to where he can see how he can connect. It's just he's not quite there.
So the big thing there is self-honesty, right? You like, and a lot of people are not honest with themselves. Like most of the time when I get C class and B class guys in classes, I always get told like, wow, fundamentally, I'm pretty solid. I really need to work on my movement. I need to work on my stage planning. And then I assess their skill level based on some kind of some basic fundamental stuff that I have shooters do. And I mean, it's very telling right then and there, like, hey, okay, well, you're not gripping the gun all that well, or you're not managing the sights all that well, or it's kind of a like stacked up bad things, like stacked mistakes they're kind of building this big tolerance of, I don't want to say failure, but of like not where they want to be, but they don't want to accept that that's not where they're at. It's like, it's great to be a 3 yard or 7 yard hero, and then generally those guys have no problems drawing and shooting like a 7 yard bill drill, but they kind of lack the mental fortitude to like tell themselves like, hey, I suck at X. And in order to not suck at X, I need to really take a look at these couple of things that build up to, why I'm sucking at that, so that I can learn how, I can figure out or self-diagnose what I need to do to correct that, and obviously a lot of times that's going to a class. So you can get, somebody else got a second set of eyes on you to kind of let you know what it is that you had kind of a weakness in. The other thing though is like, again, having that come to Jesus with yourself. Like, okay, people don't like to shoot one-handed stuff very well, right? So that you go to matches all the time and a strong hand and a support hand. And the general consensus among shooters is like, well, all I got to do is just try to survive this, like I just want to get through this stage and then let's move on to all the go fast, like hoser type stages because those are fun. Well, the main thing is yeah, those are fun because that's what you practice all the time. And we only want to practice the stuff that's fun to us or the practice the stuff that we're already good at. But it's like, you have to force yourself outside of your comfort zone. So, like shooting on the move at 25 yards as a C class or B class guy. Yeah, maybe not. Maybe that's not where you need to be right now, but maybe you need to focus on things like, okay, how can I see less from the sights, or how can I change like my visual acuity to the target, right? And instead of having like such a hard front sight focus, or maybe you're new to a dot and you're like hard dot, fixated or focused instead of like being able to just superimpose the dot onto a target. Maybe you need to maybe you need to work on that skill. Maybe you need to shoot things at 7 yards or 10 yards or even 15 yards on the move. And it doesn't need to be like on the move fast, but maybe like shooting earlier as you're settling into a position. So you're still unsettled as you're firing the shot.
That's interesting. You've made a couple points now that seems to be like the big jumping off point to getting good at shooting is awareness and just understanding where you are kind of on the spectrum of shooters and what your strengths and weaknesses are. And
yep.
It sounds like you have to attack the weaknesses, especially if they're fundamental in nature. Like if you can't shoot, for instance, what would you say a good accuracy standard would be for somebody before they really start monkeying with a bunch of the go fast stuff?
Solid accuracy is you should be capable. I believe a shooter should work on the fundamentals of accuracy until they're able to put 6 to 8 rounds or 6 to 10 rounds at 7 yards through the exact same hole, basically, right? So if you're shooting a 9mm gun, you're basically, a 9mm cartridge, I would be looking at having a group that's no greater than, say, 3/4 of an inch tops.
So a paster, basically. Put all the rounds in a paster.
Basically all the rounds into a paster at 7 yards. And a lot of guys are going to maybe watching this and be like, oh my God, get out of here with that. Right. But it's true, because the thing is you want to, everybody's like, oh man, I shoot really, really good at 7 yards, but my accuracy falls apart at 25. And my challenge to that is, no, your groups weren't as good at 7 yards as you thought they were. That's why they look like they fall apart at 25. The reason they fall apart at 25 is the difference between 7 yards and 25 yards is like a multiplier of like 2.58, right? So it's like whatever size group that you're shooting at 7 yards, multiply that times 2.58, and that's going to give you what your group size would be at 25. And then lo and behold, everybody's like, oh God, I'm really not shooting as good as I thought I was at 7 yards. Well, it's like, well, exactly, right? Like if you really want to get good at shooting 25-yard groups, you best be shooting one hole groups at 7 to 10 yards. So accuracy standard for me is you should be able to shoot 4 rounds and basically have 4 rounds almost look like just a clover leaf.
How do you build accuracy? Like, how do you work specifically on accuracy? What is the Tim Herron? Here's the elevator skill on how you, or speech on how you can start to dial in your accuracy.
When I'm working on accuracy, I am not doing anything under any sort of time constraint at all, right? The timer doesn't even come out of the bag. And I know a lot of guys are like, oh, well, we shoot USPSA. We do everything under a timer. When I'm working on just fundamentals of accuracy, it's me and the gun and a target. That's it. My fundamentals are a little different, I think, than everybody else's. I think a lot of people overcomplicate what pistol shooting is. And that's because I think they read way too much and don't experiment enough to kind of learn their own strengths and weaknesses. The biggest thing is like if everybody kind of follows like the old like list of fundamentals, like let's say even from the NRA, right? If you've taken a basic NRA pistol class, I think the list of fundamentals is like 8 steps long, right? It's like stance and breath control and grip and then sight alignment. And then once you get the sights aligned, then it's like, okay, maintain the sight picture. Once you get the sight picture, then it's like, okay, now you're going to work on trigger control and then follow through. And the problem is this list of all of these like overly complicated these tasks turn into more like a checklist for a shooter, right? So the very first thing to do is if they're thinking about this checklist in their brain is, okay, I'm gonna build the best stance I can, and you'll see guys kind of kicking in the dirt and they're settling their feet just how they want to, and then they build their grip on the gun and they draw the gun, and then once they build the gun and they draw the gun and they've got their grip, it's almost like they're mentally checking the boxes, right? So okay, stance is good, check, okay, grip is good, check, and then every time they check the box, then they don't think about it anymore, right? Because box has been checked, that part of the checklist is good. And the problem is it's shooting a pistol is very fluid, right? It's not just this hard list of checked boxes. Like everything has to be kind of congruent and flow together. Therefore, it needs to be as simplified as it possibly can. So instead of this list of, 8 or 10 or even 4 different things, I think about things like shooting a gun. Like my process of shooting a pistol is twofold. It's 2 things. Can I grip the gun adequately to keep the gun from moving, right? And I mean the gun from moving in the hands while I'm pressing the trigger or while I'm aiming it or pointing it at the target. So it's grip and grip pressure or grip management. And then my second task is to simply manage the sights all the way through and including pressing of the trigger. I don't individualize the task of trigger control or triggering the gun as a separate, like its own separate individual task. It's, can you grip the gun in an effort to not move the sights? And can you manage the sights in an effort to hold them still on the target while you're pressing the trigger to the rear? And that could be whether you're pressing the trigger to the rear very quickly, or you're slapping the hell out of the trigger very fast to the rear, or whether you are prepping, and then pressing through, kind of that traditional, like take the take up out, or take the slack out, the take up to the wall, press through the wall. I don't like to individualize those tasks because that's when shooters get kind of wrapped around the axle with, okay, take the slack out. And again, it becomes a checklist. Okay, check. Okay, now add pressure until the gun fires. And so they're waiting. And then all of a sudden they're like, okay, everything is good, and capture it. And then they smash the hell out of the trigger and they end up moving the gun. So the simplified version is grip the gun and manage the sights. If you can do those 2 things, regardless of how you apply pressure to the trigger, guess what? The gun's not going to move, and your point of impact is going to match what your point of aim was.
For a almost as fast as you can pull the trigger sort of standard, what would you say? Like a palm size group at 7 yards? Or
yeah, I'd say so. Yeah, like a palm or a fist size group at 7 yards should be kind of what you should be working to attain.
And probably like we'll say 6 shots, just because that's what a build drill is. So
yeah,
6 shots as fast as you can pull the trigger 7 yards in a palm or fist size group.
I'd say in about the size of like the front of a fist, a front of a fist size group. So 3.5 inches, 4 inches.
Got it. Now this whole thought of people just not knowing what they need to be working on, when you see kind of the middle and kind of like upper middle ranks of shooters, is in your opinion, are they having this kind of the same issues, just a different set of issues, but it generally kind of stems back to them not being aware of what they're trying to do and just only doing the stuff that's easy to them? Or what's your take on that?
Yep. Nope. Completely. The thing about, like, especially like kind of thinking about classification, right, is, and I'm sure you've probably heard it as well. Like guys that are like in C class it's like they've either figured out one or the other, right? They've either started to figure out the accuracy kind of standards that are needed to make like a C class shooter. And, they were fast, but maybe they weren't being able to put the accuracy together. The other end of the spectrum, of course, right? We call those the speed demons, and the other guys, of course, are the turtles. They're the guys that got the accuracy figured out, but they haven't been able to apply the speed to it. So there's always kind of just 2 ends of the house there. Somewhere along the way, obviously, they start to meld those 2 things together. But once they find they're like, okay, I've arrived. I'm able to do things now, to what their way of thinking is, like, okay, this is as fast and this is about as accurate as I can shoot without one or the other really falling off. And then, of course, then we call that a plateau, right? And this is where guys are like, I'm stuck. I don't know how to get past this. They don't understand, or they don't know where to go next, because visually they're starting to be aware of just about everything, right? So like maybe they've started to be able to kind of call their shots a little bit, or maybe they've got the speed to kind of match where they were accuracy wise, as far as just like behind the gun, right? And we're not talking about running, or we're not talking about anything else, just in how they shoot the gun. So you get guys that just start to get past where they're 100% visually comfortable, or confident in shooting the gun. These are the guys that kind of roll into the match, and they're shooting double taps on everything, right? So they over refine their initial sight picture, and then they're just yanking through the trigger twice really, really fast, in hopes that both shots are going to be there. And these are the guys that, of course, then that they're basically only shooting with 50% efficiency, or 50% accuracy in their shooting. Because let's say on a 32 round field course of fire, they're really only taking about 16 sight pictures. If there were 16 paper targets, they're only seeing one sight picture for every 2 presses of the trigger. And that's bad. But the problem is they perceive speed as being, well, this is what I have to do to go fast. I have to let go of everything to make that second shot happen, or sometimes even that first shot happen. Because they just haven't been able to learn like visually what is acceptable. So it's like, I need to see perfect. And then if I get perfect on the first shot, everything else after that is okay. As long as, like in their mind, as long as I'm doing these other 2 or 3 things somewhat correctly. The other end of the spectrum are guys that maybe been shooting that way for a while, and they start to like realize that, man, I'm shooting a lot of misses. I need to shoot more accurately. So, but the problem is because they don't believe that they can perceive the sights or what the gun's telling them at speed. So what do? They slow down their shooting to match like visually what they can reference and what they can see. So they don't get out of their own way visually to let anything happen at a faster rate. So in practice, I have to be able to kind of learn how to outrun the headlights, so to speak, so that I can, first of all, feel what it's like to shoot at that level of speed. And then secondly, continue that level of speed and let my vision start to catch up or acclimate to what it is that I perceive that I couldn't see before. And most people, that's exactly what it is they think that because they're shooting, say 0.20 or 0.25 splits on a target, they're like, I'm double tapping that because shooting that as fast as I can. It's like, great. What did you see from that second sight picture? And they're like, I don't understand the question you're asking. And it's like, did you see a sight picture at all for that second shot? And they say, no, I double tapped it. And it's like, well, what if I told you, in order for you to get out of the rut that you're in, you need to see and understand the information that the gun is telling you about every shot, not just 50% of the shots that you take. And then so we work on things like shot calling, like learning how to perceive the information from the gun at the moment that the shot is fired, how they're able to see the dot or how to see the front sight lift and recoil. And it's not watching the sights completely lift and return all the way in recoil, but just the moment they lift, that's all that's needed. If you can see even just that much, that's enough to begin to start calling your shots with a lot, with a very high degree of success. So in practice, I have to be able to take that step forward. Like if my left foot is speed and my right foot is vision, right? And vision meaning accuracy, meaning perception of what's going on with the sights or anything else, like anything visual, I need to first take a step in the speed department. And I don't need to take a huge step in speed, but I need to step out of my comfort zone and shoot just a little faster than what I can perceive everything visually. But then and everybody's like, yeah, but my accuracy it starts to fall apart. Okay, great. That's why we're in practice doing this. We're not doing this at matches. We're doing this in practice. But once we take that small step in speed, and now I'm uncomfortable shooting that level of speed, now I'm going to just stay right there. I'm not going to back the speed off. I'm going to stay right where I'm at. And I'm going to let my vision, I'm going to rep it again and rep it again and rep it again, and let my vision start to acclimate to that level of speed. And the eyes are an amazing thing. I mean, visually your eyes will catch up and see things or acclimate to whatever speed is happening very quickly within 2 to 3 repetitions of something. So, but to me, that's the big thing to be able to get people out of a certain plateau is they need to understand that it's in practice is where I want to make mistakes, because the mistakes are where I learn. Right. And I think people get too wrapped up around the axle with like, I want to be perfect and my practice needs to be perfect. No, sometimes practice needs to be, dare I say, I don't want to say a dumpster fire, because we definitely don't want to practice to be a dumpster fire, but it should at some point in time be a little chaotic, right? Because I need to learn how to go faster so that I can make my eyes start to acclimate to that higher level of speed. My eyes will start to see things, and like maybe let's say for instance a Blake drill, right? A simple 3 targets about a target width apart. Draw and fire 2 rounds on each target. And if we're only used to seeing like all 6 sight pictures, like it's bang, bang, and then move the gun, bang, bang, and then move the gun, bang, bang. And we're doing that across, 3 targets. At some point in time, I'm going to be stuck, right? Because if we shoot a Charlie, then we're almost murdering ourselves. Like, man, I got to shoot all A's on that. Shooting all A's at that level of speed, or with that level of control or visual awareness, what are you learning from that? You're learning slightly the difference in not overdriving or over muscling or moving the gun from the A zone to the C zone or D zone or whatnot. But what are you seeing? Like, how are you pushing yourself visually to work with less, right? I mean, everything that we do in practical shooting is like in minimums. Like, we work in minimums. I want to minimize my exposure to things. I want to minimize my visual processing to just what is needed for a shot. We're never looking for perfect. We're looking for acceptable, right? And sometimes acceptable is if the back of the gun is kind of just anchored to the middle of the target, that's enough. Other shots might, if the front sight is anywhere in the realm of the rear sight, or if the dot is just kind of floating anywhere in the center of the target, that's good enough, and then maybe sometimes we need high levels of acceptability, which is like, okay, 25-yard head box, I need the sights perfect and I need them still, but I need to learn how to differentiate that one is not for everything, right? I got to learn to be able to work like all facets of sight pictures or sight movies, and like allowing the gun to move a lot or a little, minimizing that, but visually like being able to be aware of all of that stuff.
It seems like there is a shift going on right now between the whole like front sight focus and target focus. Where do you kind of fall on that spectrum? And it depends is an acceptable answer, but you have to qualify it and talk a lot more if you take that way out.
No, that's fine. I do believe it depends. I am one that used to be years ago of the, kind of the thought that everything needed to be that hard front sight focus. Iron sight shooters have, that's been the institutionalized answer for everything, right? It's like, oh, you're inaccurate. Hey man, you really need to be hard front sight focused on that. You weren't focusing on your front sight enough. And in reality, I see more shooters over refining sight pictures, whether they're iron sight, shooters, or whether they're red dot shooters. I'm seeing more people over refine sight pictures, and they're spending too much time refining the sights because they're so hard front sight focused or hard dot focused. And this is where people generally have such a hard time switching over to a red dot if they've shot iron sights for years, right? They're like, I can't pick up the dot. I can't, I'm having a hard time, like the dot's moving around a whole lot. And it's like, well, that's because you're looking at the dot. You're not looking at a target and kind of like softly superimposing the dot or the iron sights to the target. So, I mean, just over the years, I have learned like hard front sight focus, that's not the answer. In fact, that's rarely ever the answer. Primarily the answer is if I can get you to probably utilize like a softer target focus, and being able to utilize the iron sights more efficiently. And what I mean by that is, right, hard front sight focused. And we always look at everything as front sight, front sight, front sight. That's what we've been taught forever and ever and ever. But I think it's wrong. It's the wrong way of doing things. It's like giving somebody an order to, okay, I need you to dig me a 6 foot deep hole, right? But I'm going to give you a garden spade and I'm going to give you a backhoe, right? And so like the backhoe machine, you can't use until the very end. So you're going to have to start digging this massive hole with this little bitty garden spade. That doesn't make any sense to me, right? Like why are we trying to do the majority of our aiming or the majority of the work with the smallest aiming device on the gun, which is the front sight? So, and this is going back to iron sight shooters. So instead, we've got like generally this like half-inch tall, half-inch or quarter-inch tall and half-inch to 3/4 inch wide big rear sight with like this little bitty notch in it. Yet everything that we preach to people is that they should be focusing on this itty bitty little bitty nub on the front of the muzzle to aim the gun with. And then you're kind of like doing the fine tuning or like the last little bit of work with the largest aiming device on the gun, which is the rear sight. And my challenge is, I think you should be using the rear sight to grossly aim the gun first and foremost, which will allow you to use a soft target focus or a target focus, so to speak, on everything. And then just fine tune as needed, kind of peripherally, the front sight to the rear notch and shoot the gun.
I missed a lot of seal looking at my front sight, I noticed.
Uh-huh.
Because the bullet goes where the front sight is, but if you don't have it where it's supposed to be on the target, creates problems, and getting sucked into that vacuum of watching that little pipe of fiber optic glow out there at the end of the gun. It's easy to just get to the right or the left or just over a very small aiming point, whereas a soft target focus, I agree with you. I think that's the answer. And I shoot all of my iron sight guns as if they're dots now.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the big thing is like dot shooters generally struggle if they've shot iron sights for years when they move to a dot, because they've been shooting iron sights so inefficiently forever, right? And then as they finally learn to shoot a red dot, like for all the advantages of what a red dot sight brings to the table, as far as like, now I get to have a target focus. The funny thing is guys will go back, will kind of revert back to shooting iron sights for a while or experiment. And they're like, oh my God, I've never shot iron sights as efficiently as I have, since I've been shooting a red dot. And it's like, yeah, that's called learning something and learning how to actually process information based on target focus, not a hard front sight focus. Like you've been shooting iron sights wrongly for so long that it took you getting away from iron sights and shooting something that forced you to be target focused to then go back and learn to shoot iron sights, at a much higher degree.
So Tim, where can we find your training schedule where people can come hang out with you on the range?
My newly redesigned website is timherronshooting.com. That you can find me there. I've got a YouTube channel, which is also Tim Herron Shooting. I've got I'm on just about all of the social media platforms. Facebook is either Tim Herron. I've also got a Facebook business page at Tim Herron Shooting, and an Instagram is also Tim Herron Shooting. So pretty easy to find me on just about any of those. If you're interested in hosting me for a class or interested in getting signed up for a class, you can find my full schedule on my website. There's registration links for a lot of the classes there. If there isn't, then you can send me a direct message either through the website, or you can send me an email, and I answer those. I try to answer everything within 24 hours. Sometimes it's 48 hours, but yeah, or send me a Facebook message or Instagram, a DM. I'm very receptive to all of that. I like to, obviously I could nerd out on this stuff for another 2 hours. I love everything shooting. And I love to help shooters get better.
So pivoting off that interview with Tim, I do want to talk about kind of the face of USPSA on the internet and major match coverage. This has been a topic that's come up on a couple of the other podcasts that are going this year. And I just wanted to throw in my 2 cents as well. I put a poll up on my YouTube channel asking what kind of coverage would you be interested in for a USPSA Nationals type match. I got about 900 respondents and about 700 people agreed they'd like to watch some kind of form of that. And about 700 of those people said that they would prefer sort of a Sports Center type wrap up. And I agree. I think a Sports Center type wrap up is probably the right thing to do if you consider how much of our sport is just downtime. So consider the Super Squad. It takes them about a minute to make ready. It takes them about 15 to 20 seconds to shoot a stage. It takes about 2 minutes to reset and score the stage. And then when they call for a perfect double to be looked at on that 15-yard swinger or whatever, however long it takes for the range master to come out. So let's just call it, there's about 4 minutes for 15 seconds of action. So 240 seconds for 15 seconds of action. That's a ratio worse than American football, and there is not near enough beer involved in USPSA to make that entertaining. So that's where a summary show is really going to wrap things up. And I've spent some time thinking about it and the way that I would go about it if I were producing this content. And I think it should be the organization who produces the content to sort of do this. It should be accessible via any member who pays dues. They should have access to the coverage. But if you're a non-member, they should have like a pay-per-view option as well, so that people who are outside the org can potentially look at it. But if you think about it, this is a real good bridge building sort of tool to the greater gun community who just stumbles across it on YouTube or whatever. And it does present opportunities for USPSA to let their sponsors run like video ads that would be sold at kind of a premium. So I think a wrap-up type show would take between 45 minutes to an hour. You would need some color commentators to provide sort of a backdrop for where the competition is happening, the range conditions, a run through of the stages and all that kind of stuff. So how I see it going is you have 2 or 3 guys with enough understanding of the game to provide meaningful commentary, but enough personality to make it interesting, hopefully some good chemistry there, and have about 3 to 5 minutes of an intro. Generally, there's going to be 2 divisions that are competing. So before you walk into the divisions, they would do kind of a walkthrough through all the stages that the Super Squad shot that day. So they would use a drone to like fly through the stages and show you all the shooting positions, fly above it to show you how everything is sort of set up and really make you understand what it is you're looking at. And then they would then summarize how the Super Squad ran through the stages using 3 or 4 different cameras all kind of cut together, and you can look at that. And having somebody sort of narrate and talk about what's happening, who's winning the stage, how many match points are at play, who came close, but then through a mic, like that kind of drama, creating sort of the thread of a story that can build stage on stage on stage. So about 3 to 5 minutes per stage of summary per division would be interesting. And you're going to have 6 or 7 stages in the first division, maybe interview competitors for that day, have like a sideline reporter type of person who's going to talk about how the match went, what they're getting ready to do tomorrow, what they think they're looking ahead for. Switch over to the second division that's going on there and do the same thing. Then kind of wrap up with kind of a look at the next day's stages, what's on the line in the different zones, which are the high value stages, and kind of get people ready for tomorrow, what the forecast is, all that kind of stuff. Just you could wrap it up, have a consolidation of 5 to 10 minutes. And there's your 45 to 60 minute show. Hopefully it would go live the evening of prime time in the prime time spot at like 7 p.m., 8 p.m. Eastern, so that people who are shooting the match as well as who are watching from afar can both kind of tune in and see how the day went. I think it would be awesome to be a competitor at Nationals and be able to watch a show like that. Like, I think it would be really cool. People could get together and watch it. It would just be a lot of fun, and it would provide some context for what's going on at the match. Another idea I had for a segment is if like they threw out a social media tag at the match, like post your match video on Instagram, you use this match tag, and we'll go through that and grab highlights from people who aren't on the Super Squad and feature them in there. Grab some of the like maybe the top 10 non-Super Squad performances and the not 10 or something like that. Like if somebody falls down or in a comical way or makes a funny joke, whatever, just the kind of the cool stuff that happens at major matches when a bunch of like-minded people get together would be cool to feature. So that's what form I see USPSA electronic media taking and being meaningful. To USPSA's credit, they do have a YouTube channel where they have been live streaming both low cap nationals and multi-gun nationals. But the problem with live streaming, as we mentioned, is the incredible amount of downtime to uptime. Like, I don't want to watch people reset, and I don't care if it's the super squad is resetting. That's just really, really boring. I tuned into low cap and realized what was going on and then kind of checked out. They're doing a cool thing where they have like several cameras downrange and they use a switcher to kind of switch perspective, and they do a good job keeping the shooter in the most interesting frame. But at the same time, with no color commentary, it's just super boring. And that may be news to you that USPSA has a YouTube channel, but they do. They've got about 7,000 subscribers despite having 35,000 members. And honestly, their YouTube channel is woefully underused. Like, if you look at organizations like Lucky Gunner or TFP TV, they've kind of figured out how to do media and reach a much larger audience. For all USPSA talks about finding new members and growing the sport and all this kind of stuff, the easiest way to reach the most eyeballs is to create engaging content and host it on YouTube right now. Like, that is the best way. As somebody who makes gun media as a hobby, YouTube is basically the only platform that doesn't completely cut you off at the knees. They cut you off at one knee, but not both. Instagram's terrible. It's an echo chamber. Facebook is even worse because they throttle you. If you want to reach your whole audience on Facebook, you have to pay them to boost your signal, which means that they let your stuff actually see the people who've liked your page. So YouTube is our best option to find more people and get them into the sport. If that is a priority, then I think using the awesome product that is the USPSA game, figuring out a way to tell stories with it, hosting gun reviews, whatever they want to do with the YouTube channel, like, there's tremendous uncapped opportunity right there. Front Sight's a stupid magazine. We shouldn't even be spending the money to print it anymore. Make it go online only and film video articles that feature sponsored content and all the sponsors' logos or whatever. YouTube needs to be where USPSA is at in this time frame. So with all of that criticism lobbied, hey Foley, I'm going to need a ride to my car at Race Gun Nationals. See you there. Now, another thing I like to do is talk about the major matches that we're having, because it kind of shows you what the heart of the sport is thinking, the enthusiast set who are spending the most money and most time in pursuing the game, and the divisions and sort of where we are. I like to keep tabs on those numbers. I will report winners if they are a professional shooter, if they are a sponsored shooter from like a major brand. I'll say their names because it's already all over the internet, but I respect people's anonymity, and I'm not going to throw your name out there if you're not one of those people. So no hard feelings, but I'll only say the names of the people who won who are over 18 and shoot for a major company. So the Golden Bullet Championship took place out in California, and this was interesting to me because the argument that you always hear is the reason production is a 10-round division and all this kind of stuff is because of restriction states. Well, California has some of the worst gun laws in the nation, if not the worst. And you would think that like limited 10 and production are like the top divisions in California, and no. Open is the #1 division at the Golden Bullet Championship. So the division that requires 30-round magazines to shoot is the #1 division at the Golden Bullet. The #2, very close on its heels, is Carry Optics with its 23 and 24-round magazines. Then PCC is #3 with its high-capacity magazines. So California, being the banned state that it is, has basically no difference with their major match participation than any other state in the nation. As far as winners for the matches, one thing that's interesting, and I've looked at a couple matches in California, Roadrunner was sort of the same way, is that no pros really go shoot the California matches, and that's kind of interesting. Most of the pros that I'm aware of live in the South and Southeastern United States, and some up in the Northeast, but there really isn't anybody who's out west, which is interesting because there's people in Arizona and New Mexico who are pro shooters, but they just don't go into California to shoot matches, which is interesting. Eddie Garcia was as big a name, and he won limited division. Moving to the middle of the country for the Kentucky section, John Vlieger of Mark 7 and I think Rafferty Gunworks or whatever won open and high overall. Shane Coley of Team Glock took limited, and the breakdown is very typical for what you see with the dot divisions absolutely outnumbering the iron-sighted divisions. And just before recording this, they finished the Ruger Area 7, and that was actually a really interesting match for a couple reasons. The dot crowd absolutely dominated the iron sight guys in terms of capacity. High cap vastly outnumbered low cap as per always. But you get into kind of the W's, and Shane Coley won limited division in Area 7. Bill from Go Fast Don't Suck was right on his heels at 96%, so way to go, Bill. And then the third most interesting thing in this match is what happened in PCC. There was a female junior shooter who won PCC, and she beat Lena Michalek, Jerry Michalek's daughter, by 8%. Those of you who understand the scoring model in this game know that a margin of greater than about 3 or 4% is an absolute beating, and 8% is pretty serious. And that's not me saying that Lena's no good, by no means am I saying that. Lena's an amazing PCC shooter. It's just this junior shooter is that good. So if you're familiar with the sisters from Utah, they're absolutely two shooters to watch. They're doing amazing things. And absolutely running away with PCC cements that. And I flipped a coin to myself to say which of the things is most interesting, and Carry Optics lost. So Carry Optics, it will be my number 2 most interesting thing, and that is that Max Michel was challenged in Carry Optics. The closest margin I was aware of Max being challenged in Carry Optics was about, like, I think 96% at Nationals last year with Jason Bradley. Well, Mason Lane, who was shooting open just earlier in the month, comes in shooting Carry Optics and comes at basically 99% of Max. And it really came down to penalties. Mason had one more delta and a mic, whereas Max shot a penalty-free match. Their alpha count was the same. It really came down to those. Mason was actually a half second faster than Max. So I'm really excited to see the Carry Optics Nationals this year and see how Mason does to keep up with Max, because it'd be really cool for there to be meaningful competition against Max. And the most interesting thing is Open. JJ Rakaza won Open Division. And I mean, yeah, obviously JJ's going to win Open matches, but it's interesting to me how he won. He was 2 seconds faster than the number 2 shooter, but he won by about 10% because he out-alphaed the other guy so much. He was almost penalty-free. I think he had 1 mic, whereas the number 2 guy had like 6. And JJ's alpha count was 10% higher than the next guy. So for people who says like alphas don't matter in Open, it's like, well, yeah, they kind of do, because JJ basically won the match on points, which is very interesting considering it's an Open division to me. That's going to bring us into industry news, and there actually is an interesting gun in industry news this month. It is the Canik SFX Rival that is announced on the Canik Arms Turkish website that you can click a button and make turn into English. Canik is revamping their SFX pistol with the SFX Rival, and that is a 5-inch version of the gun that will be legal for IPSC competition. It's going to come with a magwell, which is an interesting choice. Maybe that's just for bling, but none of the divisions it's actually going to be competitive in will allow it to wear the magwell. And they've updated some features on the gun, which makes it actually pretty squared away. I gotta believe that it's going to come in at about the $700 to $800 price point, because if you look at what they did and how they sell their Elite model in the 4-inch gun that Salience worked on, that's an $800 gun. So looking at what they did with this, I think it's probably going to come in around that price point too. So what did they change about the SFX Rival? First and foremost, it's kind of a light gray, which is, I guess, interesting. I mean, SIG is doing it, so why not, Canik do it as well. The slide machining is significantly more aggressive. The front serrations and serrations on the top of the gun are more usable, and they're in the spot that competition shooters like to rack guns, so that's to the good. If you look at the weights of the gun is about a couple ounces heavier than the SFX, which has a longer slide and a longer barrel, and there is less material on the Rival slide, so that means the frame has gotten significantly heavier. One of the ways you know it's gotten heavier is that it has ambidextrous controls. Lefties rejoiced, because now you can get to the controls on your side of the pistol. I bet the mag catch is probably reversible as well. The texture on the gun has been updated. I'm hoping it is improved. Time will tell. But probably the most interesting thing is that the trigger looks like it's been worked on. It looks like it's probably going to have a 90-degree break if you look at how they've basically set up that trigger. I'm willing to bet that the trigger is already better out of the box than even the SFX triggers, which are pretty exceptional. And if you look at the rear sight, they've actually added an adjustable rear sight to the gun as well. So they've really kind of dialed in the value with this gun, which is why I expect it to hit the market about $700 to $800. I'm hoping to get my hands on one in a future review, so stay tuned for that. Other industry news is Jason Bradley is now shooting for Team Canik. He went to some section match somewhere, I think it was the Cornhusker Classic, and did well there. But he's wearing the Canik jersey, just like Frank the Tank and Nils, so way to go, Jason. It's always cool when stuff like that works out. And to finish up with just a quick recap of what went on with my channel this month, there are some videos you can go watch if you're interested. I reviewed the Shadow 2 Optics Ready, which is an absolutely brilliant gun, but CZ, quit breaking my heart. The whole well, you can buy the optics plate for us model is absolutely stupid. It is pants on head stupid at this point. Quit doing it. You know as well as I know that those plates are never ever in stock and they go out of stock as soon as they come in stock. So figure something else out. Just throw an RMR plate or an RMR and a Delta Point Pro. You can even charge more for it. Throw those in the box with the gun. Selling an optics ready gun that is not truly optics ready is borderline criminal. It's not optics ready, it is just optics capable. That said, I absolutely love shooting the CZ Optics Ready. I'm really happy to have one. They're pretty rare to find. It's a fantastic gun, so I look forward to being able to do more content with that gun on Carry Optics stuff. I did the video that I already talked about contrasting the race holster to a traditional closed holster, and interestingly found that there was absolutely no difference in my draw times. Now in that video, I showed drawing only once from 3 different positions at 5, 10, and 15 yards, but I actually drew 3 times at each position, and I did it also at 20 and 25. There was no point in putting all that data in there because it was pretty cut and dry that there's not a difference between the holsters. What mattered more than the type of holster was how warmed up I was. Because I shot the race holster first, my closed holster draw times were actually just a little bit faster, which is kind of crazy. You can watch the match video of me having a bunch of light strikes. It's the most entertaining match video that I've ever made. However, it's not a lot of fun to shoot a match when you've got light strikes left, right, and center, so there's that. And finally, I reviewed the Double Alpha XIP mag pouches. Guys, if I could ask a favor from you when I do these practical gear type videos, if it's not a piece of gear that I can use in the long term, if you use that piece of gear and watch the video, please comment on it and share your experience, because people who are seriously interested in buying this kind of gear, they want to hear everything. If you love it, post it, say how long you've been using it, and if you don't love it, post that as well and share your experience. Really use these videos as a place where you can chronicle your experience with the product so that other people who are potentially looking at buying this kind of gear will have multiple voices in a single place where they can really understand what they're getting into. But the XIP mag pouches are absolutely brilliant. They're really good mag pouches. They're lightweight. The ball joint works very well. They streamlined how the magazines are retained, and you can even tune the magazine ride height. So the XIP pouches make a lot of sense if you need high-end features in a mag pouch. The XIP pouches have your name all over them. And that's what I've got for you guys. If there is additional content that you would like to see, sound off in the comments, let me know what that is. Remember, over on Patreon, you can catch the full versions of my interviews with these people. I have some really interesting interviews lined up for next month. I may have to go to twice monthly on this, maybe doing the full show and then just launching an interview kind of mid-month, because the interviews are actually fairly easy to do and I enjoy them. So leave your comments, let me know what you think and what you'd like to see. Email address is on my About page if you want to send me an email, we can have further conversation. And YouTube thinks you'll enjoy these 2 videos, so you can watch some more videos. Appreciate you guys, I'll catch you on the next one.